name is Dirkzwager. I work for BT, but I'm talking to you about a project which is called Mirror, and the subtitle is Reflective Learning at Work. Mirror is a 4-year research project. It's partially funded by the European Union. As you can see at the logos at the bottom, it's 15 organizations working together in a consortium to investigate how can we make more of reflection. Charles already said it, it's a bit of an undiscovered area where a lot of people do reflect, but we're not sure, is it structured, what do we get out of it? And what Mirror is trying to do is research how can we support reflection using technology. I know that the network is not really good. What I could do is actually ask you to give me direct feedback so we can together reflect afterwards, but you would need to be on the network, and I'm not sure if I'm going to try it. Who is capable of accessing the network now, the Wi-Fi? Stop trying, sorry. I will tell what it is though, and you can try it offline. Basically what it is, we call it the live interest meter. And basically what you can do is you can, everybody can log onto the website and they can actually say in the slider, do I like this or do I not like this, or is it comprehensive or not, so you can actually set your own scale. And what you will see in the graph live is actually the average, your own, and how it's spread it. It's recorded in a timeline, and you can set markers in it, and you can record your session as well. So it enables you to later identify where was the audience getting your story, where did you fail, so it gives you direct interaction. And it's got other functionality like polls and questions and so on, so that makes it really useful. A bit about myself. I work for BT Learning Solutions. We also work closely with BT Group on external learning. My main focus is on external customers. I work with customers to help them identify how can they improve learning, how can technology help, things like that. Why are we participating in Mirror? Mainly because we want to stay ahead of the game. We want to be thought leading in learning. We want to help our customers going to the next stage. We talk a lot about vision, what's happening in the next 5 years. Projects like Mirror help us to engage with researchers and actually help to see what can we do next in learning. And that's what this is about. A quick question, who actually has a process in their organization to support reflection? Okay, about 5 to 10%, I guess. Although if you really think about it, everybody reflects. If you ask people, do you reflect, you always get into discussion, what's reflection about, do I reflect? So it's still a vague area to talk about. For us in the project was the basic things is that we saw a number of challenges. We know that people learn, actually they learn on their job. 90%, it's the 20 and the 70 I take and I add them. It's simple. We know that when people learn, there is no teacher, there is no HR manager. There might be a manager who is important, and in many cases there's no content. There's no real process. So how can you optimize that? And our goal was to actually say, how can we identify the process, research it, but also how can we use tools to actually optimize and give people the tools to better reflect. There's a lot of theory on reflection, and actually I think there are two main ones who actually contradict each other. One is a guy named Donald Schoen, and he actually said, he looked at reflection in action. He says it's a continuous process. It's like when you're driving a car and you're taking a turn, you continuously adjust to how the road goes. The other guy is a guy named Bout. He actually says you can't really reflect and work. It needs to be two separate things. If you want to reflect, you need to sit in a room, take your moment, and think about what happens. And he's actually created a model which you can see below. He says reflection is around 3 areas. It's about what was your behavior, what were your ideas at the moment. So creativity is an important part. And what were your feelings? And emotion is a really important part when we talk about reflection. Everybody has their own view on what happened, and emotion has a really large impact. A bit about the project structure. We've identified a number of work packages. We work with different research institutes who have their own experience. There are things around how do you capture events, how do you capture data to reflect on. We look at how can creativity actually help in reflection. We have a work package which is about collaborative reflection, so how can you collaboratively reflect on something and learn from that. We do a lot with games. Games is a great environment, serious games to be safe. So if you play a game, you actually experience something without any consequences. So you can also freely reflect on that, and we trigger reflection in the games. As it is a research project, there is a model. My role in the project is to keep it practical, to say, guys, we want to sell this to companies, probably it must be deliver something for the community, there's taxpayers' money involved. But you do need a model. I won't get into detail, but basically the model says what you do is you work, or you plan to work. From the work you initiate reflection, and reflection must be facilitated. What's the input you need to actually reflect? You then have your session, and actually there's an outcome, there's an improvement, there's an action that you want to change behavior, or that you've learned something, then you go back to the start of the model. And this is actually the simple version of the model. You work, you initiate reflection with data, you reflect, and you then apply it. If you look at reflection, and it's, in my view, very close to learning, you can see that it's actually in 3 levels how we define it in the project. The first level is it's a personal thing. And when people reflect, it tends to be a personal thing. I will not share everything with my manager if I reflect on what happened. Some things I might, some things I won't. So it's a personal thing. But then again, there is a big benefit if I reflect with my team, like they do within the army. We've done a job together. What did we want to achieve? What did we achieve? And how can we improve? So it's also a social thing. And if you can capture reflection, it can be a great benefit to an organization. Outcomes of reflection can be a great benefit for an organization for continuous improvement. So that's the model we are using. We're very much looking at privacy, because that's a really important part we found. So the first stage, people reflect individually. They can then decide, do they want to share their reflections within a team? So they get shared reactions. And then the team can decide, you want to share this at an organizational level. And then we collate the information, we visualize it, it's big data, and make it available. Some examples. What we do within this research project is there are a lot of universities and research centers involved. We also have a number of test beds, actually organizations who try out applications which have been developed. And I'll just give you a quick view on what the organizations are and what they do. The first one is an organization called Regola. It's in Italy, and what they do is they work on disaster and emergency management. They look at volunteers and rescue managers. And what they do is during when they go to disasters, and they go to disasters with huge teams, mainly volunteers. And what we do is we capture what happens through all kinds of sensors. We capture GPS data where they are. We capture their heart rate and their stress rates. We also capture sometimes with video cameras. We combine that with data which is already available, like Twitter feeds on events, and we then give them the availability to, in augmented reality, play back what happened on a timeline. And that enables them as a team to see what happened. So it's a bit of, with technology supporting the story Charles told about the US Army. The other one is a clinic in Bochum. It's a clinic for heart disease. It's a private clinic where we work with physicians and nurses. I'll tell a bit more about that one. Same for the care homes in the UK, which is RNZ. Infoman is more a commercial organization, and we at BT are probably well known. This is one of the apps we use within BT. Like I already said, if you look at reflection, in theory they say emotion is a very important part of it. And working for BT, we do a lot of teleconferences. You miss part of the conversation, the communication. If you are face to face with somebody, you can see the expression. If you are on a conference call, you can't capture their voices, but that's hard. So what we actually did is we introduced something which is called the mood map. And basically it's a very simple thing. You ask people to enter their mood. There are 2 scales. At the top you can see the level of energy, which is high or low. And at the left and the right you can see is it negative energy or positive energy. And it's very easy to find out if you have a very high energy but it's negative, you're probably quite angry. What we then do is people capture their mood at the beginning and the end of a meeting. We then ask them, do you want to share your mood? The benefit if they share is that they also can see the mood of the others attending the meeting. So what they then can see is, the cross on the screen you see is the average. The little dot is the mood recorded at that time for myself. And the other little dot is the spreading of the other people who actually entered their mood. This actually gives us a view on the average moods, on what's happening. You can also put this into a timeline so you can see what happened to the energy, what happened to the, is it positive or negative during the meeting. As a manager, I would like my team to get energy from what I'm telling them, and I would like that to be positive energy. So that's one of the applications we're currently testing within BT. The other main area where we're looking at is the health sector. Already said a bit about that. And there are four main applications which we're currently testing. Basically, the approach of Mirror is not to create one big computer environment like an LMS and launch it once. What we do is we create small applications, we test them, we improve them, we test them. We're currently in the stage that we actually think that we want to make some of those applications available to the general public to test them, try them, and give us the feedback. The first one is a virtual clinic. You actually walk around in a clinic in a virtual game. You have a reflection coach. The coach actually takes you to daily work situations. It takes you to challenging situations and then helps you to reflect on your choices. So it's a very safe environment for reflection. There's another app which is a quiz app, and what it basically does is it uses a quiz, so an assessment. The questions are designed to trigger reflection. They are designed to actually start a thinking process. The one on the right bottom side is the carer app, and that's where creativity comes in. What we found in some of the care homes in the UK is that carers were faced with challenging behavior, which they didn't understand. Sometimes if people suffer from dementia, their behavior is, for a carer, unexpected. If you don't react in the right way, you will get into an escalation and you will have an issue. What we actually did for them is we said, give them an iPad Touch, so it's an iPhone without the phone, and you can enter the situation you're facing with like in a tweet, 140 characters. And what the app actually does, it goes to a database and it uses some very smart activity technologies for analogical reasoning, and it gives you free prompts saying in another situation somebody actually did this to solve it. And you can actually pick one and then say, this is a great idea. You can make notes in the app. And it helps them to think about how can I do things differently. What we also found is that in creativity, sometimes you need to think outside of the box. So what we then did, we actually presented them with a case study, not from dementia care, but from youth prisons. They're also faced with challenging behavior and have to address that. So they're also able to actually get creativity prompts out of a different domain. Okay. Then I'll speed up. This is one which you might recognize. If you look at hospitals, at hospitals and somebody is really severely ill, a physician has to go and talk to the relatives. And physicians, in my experience, are really good physicians, but the better physician, the worse communicators. They are aware of that. So what we actually did here is we created an app for them to actually simply capture how did the talk with the relative go. And we've got a number of axes which you can see below, asking them questions like, did the relative get the message? But also questions about, is this something which you will take home later today because it didn't go well? And what we do is we capture that experience, we share it, and we make it available for team reflection sessions. And there are some responses from, early responses from users in the test beds. I really think they've gone to different views on problems, so it gave them new insights, and that's what we're actually aiming for. This is a scenario where we're using a number of apps, and basically The idea is you have a call center agent, somebody working in a call center. What they mainly do is they work with scripts. And everybody who's ever called to a call center knows that those scripts are frustrating. So what our call centers do nowadays, they're trying to train their agents to be creative, try to go away from the script. But then they have challenges. And how do you solve that? In this case, you have a call center agent. On the right hand, you have their colleagues. At the bottom, you have a coach. And basically what happens is that an agent is faced with a problem. What the agent can do is actually a challenge. Enter the problem into a text message. It then goes to the creativity app, the same one I discussed with Kara. And the app will show him a number of alternatives how he could approach it. What he can then do is document how he actually approached it and what the result was, and can then make that available to the rest of the team. So it's experience you're building. It's also been made available to the coach, and in a separate coaching session, the coach and the agent have a list of these are the things you've done, these were your challenges, this is how you solve them, and they can discuss them and improve them. The outcome of that discussion, again, is put into the cloud, into the knowledge base, so it's then again available for the rest of the call center agents. And in the end, it's also available for the organization. So if you then have this big data and you do the analysis, you can actually do an analysis and see what are the main challenges call center agents are faced with. So it's also input for the organization for continuous improvement. That was about the story. Like I said, we are a 4-year project. We're now in a 3rd year. On our website and on LinkedIn, you are able to get engaged. We are looking for people who want to try out apps. We are looking to broaden our vision. It's the openness, which was discussed in the 3rd session this morning. That's what we're looking at. So please do engage. We would really like that. Thank you.
It's always great when we have a subject and we move away from the what and into the how. It takes us nice and deeply into the subject. This is the point where, rather than listen to what our speakers have to say in a prepared way, we can ask them and get them to comment on our thoughts. So, who'd like to open us up? Sir.
Gentlemen, thank you both. You may have already answered this, but I'd certainly like to reflect on what you said post this conference. Are these slides available, or will they be made available? They will. Okay, fine. That's my question. Thank you.
Got an affirmative to that one. You're making me walk.
Sorry, I do apologise. I forgot your name. Yes, Hans. Sorry, apologies. Interesting around the call centre agents. Notice great description around the slide and what you do. Interesting point for me was around the coach. Is the coach somebody from, say, the L&D field, or is there a coach specifically assigned to each team? Or
Okay. A coach is assigned to a team, so it's a personal coach to the individual. So they build a history together and they build a relationship, which is traditional coaching. The coaches in this case are managers who are trained to be coached. Sometimes they're full-time coaches, sometimes they have the 2 job roles of being a manager and being a coach. So they're experienced people from the field. They are trained in coaching skills.
Broaden it out. Charles, your comment on coaching, particularly as far as 70-20-10 is concerned. Who are ideal coaches for that?
Well, I don't know if there's a simple answer to that. I think the ideal coaches are the people who know, not necessarily professional coaches, though there is a role for professional coaches, but certainly within learning within the workflow, there's a real opportunity and also a challenge in terms of developing high-performing individuals and managers to be effective coaches. And if I can just expand on that a little bit, there's a technique I've recommended for years and years, used myself, and which is very much aligned with the after-action review approach, and that was simply getting managers to help people to reflect as part of their one-to-one meetings that most managers will have their reports either once a week, once a fortnight, once a month. And some organisations, we've even produced little cards that say, these are the three questions that you should ask your report when you, as part of your meeting. And I guess in a way this is helping to develop a manager as coach. And those three questions are, tell me what you've been doing since we last met. And you can then discuss that. Okay, what would you do differently if you had the opportunity? There might have been a situation where you approached someone, there was a bit of a challenge with another individual, or you had a bit of a problem with the process or something, whatever happened. And the last question is, okay, let's take a step back and think what we've learned from that. And I've seen in some organisations, I've seen people keep learning logs from that, so that when they come around to their annual review, they've got a year of reflection in terms of actually what they've learned, what they can do now that they couldn't do before. And again, I think that just to close off, I think it comes back to the definition of what learning is. For me, learning is simply behaviour change. Learning can only be measured by action, by the way that people's behaviour change. You know, we learn to ride a bike, we can determine that we can ride a bike because actually we can stay upright for a certain amount of time. We look at more complex cognitive skills and learning and capability. The only way we can measure learning is by measuring what people can do. Doing a pre-test and a post-test actually measures short-term memory. It doesn't measure learning.
I'm exhibiting behaviour change now because I came over for a gentleman here, but etiquette says I've got to ask a lady first.
In the professional services world, how do you incentivise people who see their own career success based on autonomy and therefore sharing their reflections is perhaps sharing their expertise and perceived by them to devalue what they know?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I would go back and I suppose would take the Dan Pink argument from that, in that, you know, Pink wrote his book about drive, about what motivates people, and he identified three things: autonomy, mastery and purpose. And each one of those don't live in isolation. So people absolutely have a need to be autonomous, particularly in professional services. Anywhere where we're using our heads rather than our hands to do work, it's more likely to be the need for autonomy. But equally, there's a real need, a human need for mastery. And if you can have that mastery acknowledged, it's even better. I mean, all of us deep down, even though we may, you know, maybe there might be a scale, but all of us deep down really like sharing our expertise. It's a playoff, so I think that you work in terms of, and again, there's lots of different approaches, and I saw a very interesting one downstairs actually just yesterday, where people are encouraged to share, to see the greater whole, rather than the what's in it for me. It has to answer that question, what's in it for me? Absolutely. But it also has to be the greater whole. And again, I come back to the fact that, you know, training people without addressing cultural issues around what is it that this organisation, what is it that we aim to do, and what is it that as an individual aim to do, and making sure that's aligned, you can train people forevermore. And we've seen that in the financial services industry as a classic. You know, do you think Barclays Bank didn't have compliance training for, you know, or any bank didn't have compliance training? Of course, everyone was trained, but were they aligned in terms of doing things right, and so on? So, you know, it's a trade-off, I think.
Maybe quickly adding to that, what we do with Mirror also is voluntary. If people want to share, they can actually select if they want to. But there's a benefit if they share, because then they can also see what others have shared. And that works. And what we also see is that people actually make decisions on individual reflections. They share some and some they don't, which is fine.
Just to close off, Gert was talking in the opening session about what I would call social equity, about systems where people get now within, in terms of contributing to sharing and systems, you get basically build an equity. And he was saying that he made the comment that no doubt in future that will be used in terms of performance measurement. Now, I think that's got all sorts of issues around it and all sorts of challenges. But no doubt that's the way it's going to go. So that, you know, we won't be measured just on what we do, we're measured on what our contribution is as a team player, as a you know, not just individual.
We have a gentleman here who is going to make another interesting contribution here.
I don't know if it's interesting, but as you have answered some of it. It's part of how do you massage a organizational culture towards having this as a voluntary behavior. You answered some of it, but maybe into you, Hans, here on on this mirror project not just becoming a Hawthorne effect of when you withdraw, it stops. You know, it's about that it becomes something we want. If it's part of social, how do you get that to become a live culture in itself?
I think it's one of the biggest challenges in the project, that is mine. It's a combination. What we do is we actually test within the test beds and we continuously improve. We are now in a stage where we say we want to bring this to a broad world. So if you look at the website, some of the apps are actually available. You can test them. Some of them you need to engage with us before you can test them, like the LIM. If you would like the live interest meter, if you would like to test that, it's possible, but we need to create an account for you. So we're trying to get out to the open. What we're also trying to do within the consortium is, these are researchers and these are very, very bright people in their own area. So we spend a lot of time getting them to actually talk to actual users. The other thing is we also have an advisory board, which in an EU project you have reviewers, and that's a very formal situation. You're very careful what you tell them because they might actually use it. We also have an advisory board where we have a representative from the Philips Lighting University. We have Professor Bout in the advisory board, and we have David Mellon from Bursin in the institute. And they give us informal feedback also to the researchers to say, we really like this, you might need to go a bit more on that. So that's how we try to get it practical.
Are you searching for the tipping point of when it becomes something that's alive in itself?
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the apps might really be used after the project. I think the Care app, there's a lot of interest for that. The Move app, there's a lot of interest for that as well. And I hope it will be open source. It's a decision for the consortium, but that's what we're aiming for. I mean, it's funded by the European Union, and what we try to do is prove that it's useful. We try to give guidance how to use it, and then make it available, and somebody can pick it up and further develop it, which is fine as well.
Am I going next?
No more questions.
I'd like to, Hans, because Charles was mentioning just earlier the sort of the culture issues. Are you finding culture is having any impact on the way that people are participating in the project? And, yeah.
Yes, I do believe culture has a huge impact. And what we did in the project, in the initial stages, we really went to look into the test beds to get an understanding of the culture and were there any practices currently around how they reflect. And in the beginning of the project, we really focused on the 5 test beds, which were quite different organizations. What we find now when we make the applications broader available is that culture is an aspect which is really important. If there's a culture where failure is appreciated as something you can learn from, reflection is far more easier. If there's a culture where you want to hide failure, reflection is far difficult. So yes, we do see big differences in organizations and also a market to maybe support organizations in making the transition.
Thank you. Who's going to give me the next one? Are you? You have to be very careful when you're waving hair because that's sort of an indication that you're the next one up. Coming back. Thank you.
Presumably someone's tracking the financial impact of this, so therefore there's going to be some really solid incentive for organisations to change their culture is using these tools.
That's very true. One of the things we are very thorough in is how do we evaluate the impact of these applications, which is a really difficult area because how do you isolate the impact? But yes, that is one of the things we are working on to actually prove if there's an impact and what the impact was. So yeah, that's one of the outcomes of the projects. It's only in year 4, although we do have some ideas now where it really helps and where we think this might be a dead-end street.
Charles, I'd like to come back to you with the 4 points of learning. If you think, at what point in your journey did you focus on these 4? And on reflection, what do you wish that you'd done differently in terms of applying those when you were in the line for them?
think that I'm just thinking where to start, really. I guess way back when I first graduated from when I was going through my undergraduate degree, and I followed a course in 1968 where I never saw a lecturer, and you're on your own basically. I did my undergraduate degree in a science subject at Sydney University of Sydney in Australia, and there were so many undergraduates doing science degrees and medical degrees and vet degrees and so on. There was no way in which they could deliver the course to 4,000 people or whatever. So it was done by television. So you went at the beginning of every term, you went and got your notes, your lecturer's notes you bought from the bookshop. You had a summary of each lecture with a blank page beside, so you could write your own notes. Then you had a schedule as to when the when the lectures are going to be given, and they were given in rooms like this, lecture theatres, with televisions hanging from the ceiling. They were absolutely superb. And then tied to that were workshops. And I realised that actually the conversation and the collaboration that you needed to work with your colleagues in order to make sense of this stuff and to use it was really, really important, and that those conversations and that reflection were really important. And actually the learning went on, the real learning went on in the labs. So that once a week we'd go to the labs and spend 6 hours working in the labs, and that's where the real learning went on. And this other stuff was just a background, which was important. But and I tell people that this was done in 1968, and they say, "What? This it seems like a long while ago." And I wonder whether we've actually broken out of that sort of information-centric, content-centric learning into context-centric learning. And I think the light bulbs went on for me in terms of you needed to really get that learning in place. You needed to have the context. The context you had to do because you can learn about it as much as possible, but unless you do it, it's not going to stick. So I think really that put the lights on for me all those years ago, and therefore whenever I've looked at learning programs, I always hold that mirror up and say, what is this? If it's a formal, structured learning program, or program which is going to result in people doing things differently, in other words, going to learn, what opportunities are there for people to have something like, as near as damn, the real experiences that they will have in the workplace? What about the chance to practice? And again, we don't think Nadal and these guys, after they win a Grand Slam, they don't say, well, that's it, I don't need to practice anymore. Of course they go back and practice and practice and practice. And sharing and having those conversations and having the right access to the right people to ask the right questions at the right time. And then, most important, I would argue, is the chance to reflect. And it's strange that, in my experience, many organisations have actually lost the ability to reflect because we're just moving at such a pace. We don't think it's terribly important. And usually, Mike, again, maybe you have very different experiences. My experiences are often you work on a big project. You might have a sort of a big CRM implementation or some big change project. And as you get to the end of the project, usually one of the junior people in the project team are given the job of writing up the report about the project, which is then, it might be presented in some way, but it's often usually sent around in a document and filed away and never read. And actually there's real opportunities for learning by reflection. And we just miss them so often. Absolutely.
Thank you. One here and then I'll come to you.
I'm trying to work out my question as it comes out of my mouth, so apologies if it... I'm just interested, there's a requirement, I know someone touched on this earlier about call centres and coaching, but there's a requirement for managers to have a different mindset when going into a conversation to encourage people to reflect. I'm just interested in what challenges you may have faced, because certainly the business that I work in, managers are largely more experienced people doing the same job as the people they manage. So actually what tends to happen in management conversations with their teams is they tend to tell them what they should be doing differently. It just strikes me as quite a journey to take those people on somehow, to go, actually it's not your job to give the answer, it's your job to encourage these people to reflect, because that's where learning happens. And it just strikes me as an interesting challenge, and I wonder if you've faced that and how you've overcome it.
I think Charles Handy said that there are 3 jobs There used to be 3 jobs which required absolutely no training or development: parenthood, politicians, and managers. And people tend to get into a management position, then they might get some help and support and development. But actually, we very rarely do we prepare people, individual contributors in an organisation, into managing. It's a real challenge in terms of how do you impress upon people who are managing people that actually what they do and their role in terms of supporting and helping the development of people is absolutely critical. Again, the research, I mean, the Corporate Leadership Council's research shows that managers who are effective and focused on developing their people, those people will outperform others by around about 25%. And I usually present this when I'm talking to managers. I say, how would you like everyone in your organisation to do an extra day's work every week, no cost to them, no cost to you, no cost to the organisation? Motherhood and apple pie. Of course, we'd all like that. The answer to it is help your managers become effective at developing their people. Not only that, that piece of research the Corporate Leadership Council showed is that people who work with managers who are focused and effective at development are around about 40% more engaged. I've sat on HR committees, I'm sure many of us have, where we've talked about, the annual staff survey is going to be done. If we can get the engagement lever up 3%, it'll be tremendous. Actually, if you forget that, if you want to get it up 40%, focus on helping your managers be more effective at developing their people. We join companies who lead managers, and it's not really complex. It's about winning hearts and minds, and there's some really, really simple techniques. Like, give them the card with the 3 questions on it, and then ask them how it's going, and go along and do a bit of coaching yourself, or get some people to coach the managers. I mean, it's not rocket science. It really is pretty simple. But it is about hearts and minds. And just the last point I'd make on that is it only happens, in my experience, in organisations where those behaviours are modelled at the very top. If you've got people at the top of the house who don't coach and support their people, it won't happen. Again, I've written quite a bit about Goldman Sachs, not the most favourite company, everyone's favourite company at the moment. Goldman Sachs has a fantastic record of developing people, and in fact, you cannot become a partner at Goldman Sachs unless you demonstrate capability in terms of coaching, and you're not given time to do it. You have to do it off your own bat. You actually have to commit huge amounts of your personal time to develop your ability to develop others. Otherwise, there's a bar, you don't get above it. And, say what you like about Goldman Sachs, actually it's been a very, very successful company and continues to be. So I think it's a major challenge, but there are some big opportunities there.
Thank you. I have one last one.
Well, actually, you kind of answered it in the last question. I was just curious about the element of practice and putting things to practice that you've learned, and how when you're changing behaviours, you're asking somebody to do something different, and the challenge of that, and how do you encourage someone to do something they haven't done before, and then very often the first attempt, it kind of doesn't quite feel comfortable, doesn't quite go well, and then you don't have that practice element. So how do you support that shift in behaviour in the same way? But you kind of answered that in the last question.
Yeah, and the only other aspect, and the other comment I'd make is it's around a mindset. It's around accepting, and this is really difficult for lots of organisations, accepting that sometimes you're going to stretch people and there'll be mistakes. And the answer is to put safety nets in. So, for example, give you a concrete example. So you've got a new project coming up, and Sally here is a great project manager. She's always run the project she's run, been great. And James over there is only a young chap and he's not really done a lot. Rather than giving Sally the job to project manage this, give it to James and get Sally to mentor or to coach James as he goes through it. So it's about looking for opportunities to put a safety net in, to stretch people, and put a safety net in to make sure that, what is it they say, fail early and fail often, that the failures are small failures and you pick them up rather than really big ones. And that's partly mainly a cultural, about accepting, sometimes it doesn't go right. And I'd recommend any of you to go and read Dave Snowden's Connecting framework about how you deal with complexity and think about it in those terms. And Snowden worked at IBM for many years and developed this complexity model, and it's really around most of us work in organisations which are not simple, they're not complex, they're not complicated, they're damn complex, or in some cases they're chaotic. And actually managing in that is a very different, and developing in that is a very different challenge to a simple, we're not all running production lines where we can train people to work on the production lines. It's much more complex than that.
Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been a great audience. You've been right up in that right-hand side, high energy and positive. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you to our speakers today, Charles and Dirk. Thank you very much.